Eric Donovan thought it would be just another quiet day behind the wheel. After 40 years of driving, it was meant to be his last shift, one final fare before retirement. But fate had other plans. By sunset, his battered yellow taxi would be rolling up the ramp of a C-17 military aircraft. And Eric, he was about to go somewhere no civilian cab had ever been before. Every morning for over 4 decades, Eric started the same way, cleaning the headlights of his aging yellow cab as the city around him woke up. Some saw it as pointless. To Eric, it was respect for the miles, for the memories, for the machine that never let him down. Lexford had changed around him over the decades. Family shops were replaced by chain stores, old neighborhoods transformed by development. But Donovan's taxi service remained a constant. Eric was the last independent cabbie in a city now dominated by ride-share apps and corporate taxi fleets. Technology had left him behind, but a loyal clientele kept him in business, especially the military families from nearby Harrington Air Force Base. His connection to the base went deeper than business. Every morning for the past 12 years, Eric had started his day by touching the worn photograph taped to his dashboard. Senior Airman Michael Donovan, his son, smiling in his dress blues. The photo was taken 3 weeks before Michael was killed during a rescue operation in the mountains of Afghanistan. The official report said he'd saved 4 fellow airmen before a hidden explosive took his life. "Morning, Mike," Eric whispered to the photo, as he had done every day since the flag-draped coffin returned home. "Another day, serving your brothers and sisters." After Michael's death, Eric had nearly sold the taxi business. Grief had hollowed him out, leaving little room for mundane concerns like meter rates and airport pickups. His wife, Margaret, had passed 2 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. And with Michael gone, Eric found himself entirely alone. But then came the funeral with airmen from Harrington standing at attention in the rain. And later the stories, countless stories from Michael's fellow service members about his son's character, his dedication, his unwavering support for his team. One young airman had approached Eric after the service, tears streaming down his face. "Your son gave me his last bottle of water in 110-degree heat," he'd said. That's who he was, always putting others first. Something had shifted in Eric that day. If he couldn't have his son back, he could at least honor his memory by supporting the military families Michael had loved so much. He'd painted his taxi with a new slogan, "Proud to serve those who serve," and offered special rates to military personnel and their families. Over time, what began as a tribute to his son transformed Eric's business and his life. He became legendary at Harrington for his reliability and discretion. When flights arrived at 3 a.m., bringing personnel home from deployment, Eric would be there waiting, often the first civilian face to welcome them home. When young airmen found themselves stranded without cash, Eric would get them back to base, waving away their attempts to pay later. "Your service is payment enough," he'd say, echoing words he wished he could have said more often to his own son. Today was different, though. Today would be Eric's last day behind the wheel. At the urging of his doctor and his daughter Claire, who lived 3 states away with her own family, Eric had finally decided to retire. His arthritis was getting worse, and night driving had become increasingly difficult. It was time. Eric had announced his retirement a month ago, expecting little fanfare. He'd sell the taxi, move to a smaller place, maybe finally visit Claire and the grandkids more often. The military families he'd served had other ideas, though. All week, his regular customers had been stopping by with cards, small gifts, and stories about times his taxi service had made a difference in their lives. Eric noticed something odd about his regular customers this week. They'd come with small gifts and cards, sure, but there were whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, meaningful glances exchanged between uniformed passengers. Something was happening behind the scenes, but Eric had no way of knowing that Colonel Jenkins had already set Operation Final Fare in motion. Eric's phone rang, interrupting his morning ritual. The caller ID showed Harrington AFB. "Donovan's taxi," he answered, his voice still morning rough. "Mr. Donovan, this is Colonel Sarah Jenkins from Harrington Air Force Base." Eric straightened instinctively at the authoritative voice. Colonel Jenkins had been one of Michael's commanding officers and had stayed in touch over the years. "Good morning, Colonel. What can I do for you?" "I understand today's your last day of service," she said. "That's right. Hanging up the keys after this afternoon. I'd like to book your final fare if that's acceptable. 1,400 hours. Pick up at your location." Eric glanced at his calendar. "That would be fine, Colonel. May I ask where we're headed?" "Harrington Air Force Base. North entrance. Dress comfortably, but perhaps wear something nicer than usual. This is a special occasion, after all." Eric's suspicions were raised. "Colonel, I appreciate the thought, but I don't need any kind of ceremony. Just a simple fare, Mr. Donovan, a fitting end to your years of service." Her tone was professional but warm. "Will you accept?" Eric sighed, knowing he couldn't refuse. "Of course, Colonel. 1,400 hours it is." The morning passed slowly as Eric handled a few regular fares. Mrs. Peterson to her doctor's appointment, a young airman to the mall, an elderly veteran to the VA clinic. Each one expressed their good wishes for his retirement, making the day feel increasingly ceremonial, despite his efforts to treat it as ordinary. At precisely 1,400 hours, Eric stood beside his freshly washed taxi, wearing his best button-down shirt and the tie Michael had given him for his birthday years ago. A black SUV with government plates pulled up, and Colonel Jenkins stepped out, crisp in her service dress blues. "Mr. Donovan," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for accepting this last fare." Eric shook her hand firmly. "My pleasure, Colonel. Where exactly are we headed on base?" "The airfield," she replied, sliding into the back seat. "We have something special planned." As Eric drove, the colonel made small talk about the changes at Harrington, the new squadrons, the recent deployments. Eric noticed they weren't taking the most direct route to the north entrance. "If you don't mind my asking, Colonel, what exactly is happening at the airfield?" Colonel Jenkins smiled. "Patience, Mr. Donovan. Some things are worth the wait." At the security checkpoint, Eric expected to hand over his ID for inspection as usual. Instead, the guards rendered a sharp salute to his taxi as the barriers lifted automatically. Eric's confusion deepened. "Colonel, just keep driving, Mr. Donovan. Follow the signs to Hangar 7. As they rounded the final turn past the flight line, Eric saw it, a massive C-17 Globemaster III. "Ettori haba for now or high, ed day." Its rear loading ramp lowered to the tarmac. Surrounding the aircraft stood at least 100 Air Force personnel in formation, all in their service dress blues. A large banner hung nearby. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Donovan." Eric's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I don't understand." "Park over there." Colonel Jenkins pointed to a designated spot near the formation. "It will all make sense soon." Eric's heart hammered in his chest as he parked where she pointed. When he got out, every single person in uniform snapped to attention at once. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair and general stars approached. General Robert Harlow, the base commander. "Mr. Donovan," the general said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Eric shook the offered hand, feeling distinctly out of place. "The honor's mine, General, but I'm afraid I don't quite understand. What's happening here?" General Harlow smiled. "Walk with me." As they moved toward the assembled formation, the general spoke quietly. "For 12 years you've been what we in the military call mission-essential personnel, though you never wore a uniform. After losing your son, you dedicated yourself to supporting the men and women of this base and their families." Eric felt a lump forming in his throat. As the general continued, "You've driven through blizzards to reunite families, waited hours without charging when flights were delayed, and become a trusted friend to 3 generations of airmen." They reached a podium set up near the C-17's loading ramp. The general gestured for Eric to stand beside him, then addressed the formation. "Many of you standing here today have an Eric Donovan story. How he drove all night to get Sergeant Williams to his father's funeral when all flights were grounded. How he kept Lieutenant Chen's family secret when she was planning a surprise homecoming. How he's routinely turned down holiday bonuses, asking instead that the money go to the base family support fund." Eric felt tears threatening. He'd never wanted recognition for any of this. It was just his way of staying connected to Michael. "Today," the general continued, "on Mr. Donovan's retirement, we wanted to give him something meaningful. Something that connects him to his son and recognizes his service to our Air Force family." He nodded to Colonel Jenkins, who stepped forward with an envelope. "Inside is an official invitation and authorization," Jenkins explained. "Operation Final Fare." Eric opened the envelope with trembling fingers, reading the official Air Force letterhead. "Mr. Eric Donovan is hereby invited to participate in Operation Final Fare, a special mission to transport his taxi vehicle via C-17 aircraft to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where it will be permanently displayed as a memorial to the spirit of service, exemplified by both Senior Airman Michael Donovan and his father. Mr. Donovan is authorized to accompany his vehicle for the dedication ceremony." Eric read the letter twice, not believing his eyes. "You want to take my taxi to Germany?" General Harlow nodded. Ramstein Air Base was Michael's second home during his deployments, his gateway to Afghanistan. Colonel Jenkins suggested a permanent memorial honoring both Donovans, the airman who gave his life, and the father who spent 12 years serving in his memory, Colonel Jenkins added. "The taxi will be displayed prominently at the base, a symbol of American civilian support for our troops and a daily reminder of the Donovan legacy of service." Eric looked at his taxi, the vehicle that had, in many ways, kept him connected to his son all these years. The thought of it being preserved, not scrapped or sold, but honored at a place that had been so significant in Michael's service, was overwhelming. "I don't know what to say," Eric managed. "Say you'll drive it onto that C-17 yourself," General Harlow replied. "The aircraft is ready. Your passport has been expedited. We fly out tomorrow morning to Ramstein Air Base in Germany." Eric turned back to the general, struggling to comprehend the scale of what was being offered. "You do all this for a taxi driver?" a voice called out from the formation. "For the man who waited 6 hours in a snowstorm to drive me to my daughter's birth." It was Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, whom Eric had driven to the hospital 3 years earlier when his wife went into early labor during the worst blizzard in decades. "For the man who taught my son to change a tire when I was deployed," called another voice. "Master Sergeant Thompson, whose teenage son had been stranded with a flat until Eric stopped to help." More voices joined in, each with a story, until Eric had to wipe tears from his eyes. These weren't just customers. They were people whose lives had intersected with his during moments of need, joy, sorrow, and celebration. "So, Mr. Donovan," General Harlow said, when the voices finally quieted, "will you accept this final fare?" Eric looked at his taxi, then at the massive C-17, waiting with its ramp extended, and finally at the photograph of Michael on his dashboard. In that moment, it felt like his son was with him, urging him forward. "I would be honored, General." A cheer went up from the assembled personnel, and the Air Force band began to play as Eric was escorted back to his taxi. Colonel Jenkins explained the procedure. He would drive his vehicle directly up the loading ramp and into the aircraft, where Air Force loadmasters would secure it for the flight. "Take your time," she advised. "This is your moment." As Eric signed the authorization papers, Colonel Jenkins stepped away to take a call. Her expression changed subtly as she listened, and she glanced back at Eric with a look he couldn't quite read. What Eric didn't know was that the mission had just become more complicated and more meaningful than anyone had planned. Eric settled behind the wheel one more time, adjusting the mirror out of habit and touching Michael's photo for courage. The formation parted to create a path to the C-17's ramp, and the crowd fell silent. Eric started the engine, its familiar rumble comforting after all these years. Slowly, he began to drive forward, following the path toward the massive aircraft. As he approached the ramp, the formation snapped to attention, rendering a salute to the ordinary yellow taxi and its extraordinary driver. Driving up that loading ramp felt like more than just entering a plane. It was the final climb after years of service, a way up and a way forward. As Eric guided his taxi into the cavernous cargo hold of the C-17, he felt a powerful sense of completion. The vehicle that had kept him connected to the military community and to Michael's memory would now become a permanent part of that legacy. Inside the aircraft, loadmasters directed him to a spot marked on the floor where they would secure the vehicle for transport. As Eric put the taxi in park and turned off the ignition for what would be the last time as its owner, a strange peace settled over him. He was taking one final journey in service to those who serve, a fitting end to a career born from personal tragedy and transformed into a mission of honor. Colonel Jenkins appeared at his window. "You can step out now, Mr. Donovan. The loadmasters will take it from here." Eric nodded, but before exiting, he gently removed Michael's photo from the dashboard and slipped it into his pocket. Some things were not meant for public display. As he stepped onto the metal floor of the C-17, Eric turned back to look at his taxi, now seeming small and oddly vulnerable inside the massive military aircraft. General Harlow approached, offering his hand once more. "The ceremony continues on board, Mr. Donovan," he said. "We've arranged for some special guests." Confused, Eric followed the general toward the front of the cargo hold, where a small group of people stood waiting. As they drew closer, Eric's heart nearly stopped. Among them was a face he recognized immediately, though it had been years since he'd seen it in person. "Claire?" His daughter stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Dad?" They embraced tightly, Eric too overwhelmed to speak. When they finally parted, Claire gestured to the others, her husband, Mark, and their children, Eric's grandchildren, whom he had seen only in photos and video calls over the years. "How?" Eric managed. "The Air Force arranged everything," Claire explained. "They flew us in this morning. We're coming with you to Germany for the dedication." Eric turned to General Harlow, who smiled. "Family is part of this story too, Mr. Donovan. Your son's legacy, your service, it's all connected to them as well." When Eric asked about the ceremony details, Colonel Jenkins shared only the basics. "Standard protocol," she said, avoiding his eyes. "Nothing elaborate." But the way the loadmaster carefully positioned his taxi in the exact center of the aircraft suggested otherwise. Eric would soon discover just how far the Air Force would go to honor one of their own, and the civilian who had carried their legacy forward. The remaining personnel filed into the aircraft, taking seats along the sides of the cargo hold for what would be an unusual mission briefing. Colonel Jenkins approached the center where a small podium had been set up. "Before we continue with the ceremony, I'd like to share something that not everyone here knows," she began. 12 years ago, I was a young lieutenant stationed at FOB Sentinel when your son's team went on that rescue mission. I was one of the 4 airmen he saved that day." Eric stared at her, this new connection to Michael hitting him like a physical blow. "The official report says he dragged us out one by one before the explosion," she continued, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "What it doesn't say is that he sang 'Fly Me to the Moon' the entire time to keep us calm. 4 verses, 4 rescues. He told us his dad taught him that song on long taxi rides." Eric covered his mouth with his hand, remembering the countless times he and Michael had sung that song together during driving lessons and family road trips. "When I returned stateside and learned about what you were doing, for military families, I knew Michael's spirit lived on through you," Colonel Jenkins said. "This memorial at Ramstein, where Michael passed through before every deployment and where we have the Wall of Honor for those lost in Afghanistan, it's not just about honoring the past. It's about inspiring the future. Every young airman who sees it will learn the Donovan legacy of service, sacrifice, and unwavering support." As the colonel continued outlining the mission, the flight plan, the ceremony at Ramstein, the dignitaries who would attend, Eric found himself looking back at his taxi, now being carefully secured by loadmasters for the long journey ahead. The vehicle that had been his livelihood for decades, that had carried countless military families through moments of joy and sorrow, would now carry his son's legacy forward. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Eric was issued a special passport, given a mission briefing, and assigned quarters for the night. Claire and her family stayed with him, sharing stories and reconnecting in a way that felt miraculous given the circumstances that had brought them together. Early the next morning, Eric boarded the C-17, along with a small contingent of Air Force personnel and his family. As the massive aircraft taxied for takeoff, Eric gazed out a small window at Harrington Air Force Base, slowly receding below them. He'd never imagined leaving Lexford like this, flying toward a place he'd known only through Michael's letters and the devastating news of his death. The journey was long, but throughout the flight, airmen approached Eric to share stories about his son, or about times when Donovan's taxi had made a difference in their lives. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of connection that Eric had been weaving for 12 years without fully realizing its pattern or significance. As they began their approach to Ramstein Air Base, Eric's nervousness grew. He had never left the United States before. Now he was landing in Germany, the gateway to the war that had taken his son, but somehow strangely given new purpose to his own life. Colonel Jenkins sat beside him during the landing. "This base was Michael's last taste of home before Afghanistan," she said. "The Air Mobility Command Memorial Garden is where we've created a space for your taxi, right beside the wall of remembrance that bears Michael's name." When the C-17's wheels touched down and the aircraft taxied to a stop, Eric felt a profound sense of arrival. Not just to a physical location, but to a moment his life had been moving toward for 12 years. The cargo ramp lowered, revealing the expansive Ramstein Air Base, busier than he'd imagined, with aircraft from multiple nations visible in the distance. Outside, a formation waited at attention, mostly American forces, joined by a few NATO allies who'd heard the Donovan story. Eric's taxi, once secured, was now being prepared for its final journey to the memorial site. "Ready, Mr. Donovan?" General Harlow asked. Eric nodded, taking Claire's hand as they stepped onto German soil. The air was crisp and cool, carrying scents of aviation fuel and distant pine forests. Eric imagined Michael walking these same grounds, seeing these same buildings, feeling the weight of what lay ahead each time he departed from here. A convoy of vehicles transported them to the Air Mobility Command Memorial Garden, where Eric's taxi had already arrived, carefully unloaded and positioned at the newly constructed memorial site. The memorial itself was elegant in its simplicity. A circular plaza surrounded by a low wall bearing the names of all those who had been lost in operations staged from Ramstein, with Michael's name highlighted in gold. A special space had been created for the taxi, with a plaque describing both Donovan's service. As Eric approached his taxi for the final time, he noticed something had been added. A professionally designed magnetic sign on each front door that read, "Donovan's Taxi Service. Proud to serve those who serve. In memory of Senior Airman Michael Donovan and his father, Eric. 2013-2025. The dedication ceremony was simple but powerful. Various speakers shared memories of Michael and stories about Eric's years of service to military families. Claire spoke movingly about growing up watching her father and brother support each other, and how her father had transformed his grief into purpose. When it was Eric's turn to speak, he stood silent for a moment, overcome by the journey that had brought him here. Not just the physical journey across continents, but the emotional journey from devastating loss to profound connection. "I'm not good with words," he began finally. "That was Michael's gift, not mine. But I want to thank you all for this incredible honor. When I lost my son, I thought my purpose was gone too. But you, all of you in uniform and your families back home, you gave me a new purpose. Every time I drove one of you to a homecoming, I felt like I was welcoming Michael home too. Every time I waited with a military spouse at the airport, I felt Margaret beside me teaching me patience. Every time I helped a young airman get back to base, I felt like I was helping Michael complete his mission." Eric touched the hood of his taxi gently. "This old car has been my companion for more than 20 years. It's carried laughter and tears, hopes and fears, hellos and goodbyes. It seems fitting that its final destination is here, the place Michael passed through, on his way to his final mission. And for me, a man who never left Lexford until today, It's a chance to finally see the world my son served in, and to feel him beside me one last time. Not because it's anything special in itself, but because of the people it served. People like all of you who give everything for others. After the ceremony, as the sun began to set over the German countryside, Eric stood alone beside his taxi. He took Michael's photo from his pocket and looked at it thoughtfully. "We made it, son," he said softly. "Your old man finally learned to fly all the way to the moon and back." Colonel Jenkins approached quietly. "We need to prepare for departure soon, Mr. Donovan." Eric nodded, taking one last look at his taxi, now a permanent monument in this distant land. He thought about all the journeys it had made, the thousands of fares, the countless stories, the lives it had touched in ways both small and profound. "You know," he said. "For 12 years. I thought I was the one providing the service, but now I see it was the other way around. Every military family who climbed into this taxi gave me the gift of purpose when I needed it most." Colonel Jenkins smiled. "That's the thing about service, Mr. Donovan. The line between giving and receiving blurs until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins.